Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this Open to Export webinar on getting started in China, supported by UKTI and the CBBC. We're very happy to have you here this morning, and we hope that this will prove to be an important session for you, learning about how to do business with China. China is one of those markets that's on everybody's radar. Whether you're a big, small company, whether you're a country, no matter who you are, you're seeing China everywhere. You're seeing them in the media, you're hearing about these massive figures about markets and potential, but on the other side, you're also hearing dangers and pitfalls and talk about IPR and talk about distribution channels and all these sorts of things. And I do think that there's an awful lot of myths. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle of the positive and the negative. I think there's idiosyncrasies to every market, strengths and weaknesses. And what we hope today to bring to you with three excellent speakers is some perspective on how to go about doing your business with China. We have the Trade Relations Organization, which will give a more macro view. We have the banking and finance perspective. And we have the company who's at the coalface, doing business every day in and with China. And we really hope that this brings you some practical advice as you consider your path towards China. China, like every market, as I said, has its positives and negatives and should be treated in that way. You should be careful, but you should also be positive and proactive. It's a great place to do business, and it's a great country. So, moving forward, before we begin today, I'd like to just do a little bit of housekeeping. This is actually quite an interactive platform. What we would like is that you drop your questions in, and I can see people already dropping in some comments. So, in front of you, on your control panel, you'll be able to see that spot where it says, enter a question for staff. What that means is that when you type it in, it will pop up on my screen. If it's pertinent to the flow, I will drop it in immediately. If it's not, we'll hold it towards the end and drop it towards the speaker discussion at the end. And if we can't get to it at the time, the system will save it, and we'll be able to follow up a little bit afterwards. Now, just a little bit about Open to Export. Open to Export is a joint partnership between Haibu and UKTI. So it's a new online portal designed specifically to help small businesses in the UK, and it was launched late last year. It's somewhere between a social network and a trade forum online. So if you haven't had a look, please take the time to have a look around where you can find articles, events, opportunities, and a place indeed to ask questions and have a dialogue with experts from UKTI, CBBC, private sector, and other partners. So that's really about it from the housekeeping perspective. As I said, this is quite an interactive platform. So what I'd like to do is introduce our first poll. So these polls are to give our speakers a bit of a perspective on who they're talking to, just to understand and balance their speech a little bit in terms of the audience, but also to give you a chance to give your input. So please click on the correct answer and then click on submit at the bottom, please. So, what stage are you at on your exporting journey? Are you an experienced exporter to China? Are you an experienced exporter, but perhaps you're new to China? Or are you indeed new to exporting? So everybody has their path on the journey, and as I said, just to give a little bit of perspective for the people who are making their presentations, this would help a lot. So I can see that about 60% have voted. If you could just do a few more clicks, please. So click on the correct one, and don't forget to click the submit button right at the end. All right, so now we can see from this group that about 60% are new to exporting. As I said, this is terrific for Open to Export. This is exactly why this platform exists. We want to encourage people to export and look to new markets, and we want to give them that forum and that place where they can ask questions and get advice. So that's what today is about. So that's very, very good news. You can close that poll for us. All right, great. Let's move swiftly on. Our first speaker today, I'll just give him a quick introduction. Our first speaker today is Mark Hedley, and he's a China business advisor for London and the Southeast region, with a particular focus on the ICT sector. A fluent Mandarin speaker, Mark holds a master's in Chinese Business and International Relations from the University of Sheffield and has spent over 6 years living and working in mainland China. Having previously worked for a market entry consultancy in Shanghai, Mark has first-hand experience of helping British businesses to access the Chinese market. More recently, Mark has worked in the field of business-to-business research, specializing in China market sizing, market opportunity assessment, and competitive intelligence research for clients from a whole wide cross-section of industry. So we're very delighted to have Mark here today, and I think the first thing I should do is just hand across to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Just to say, it's a real pleasure to be able to contribute to today's webinar, which I think has some really interesting speakers, and very much looking forward to hearing from Tony and Gemma on their particular experiences and insights on doing business in China. We come at things from I suppose from a broader angle, in that we're working for companies across different industries and working with businesses of all sizes looking to export to China. So today really I want to provide a fairly high-level view of the China market, and really as a market for UK companies to export to. I can see from the poll there that quite a number of you are new to exporting, and the vast majority of you have no experience of exporting to China. And China is a very different marketplace in which to do business from, for example, markets in the EU, markets in the US, which I'm sure that most of you are more familiar with. It's different in terms of its regulations, its culture, its business practices. So hopefully we can share some tips and advice with you today in terms of how to approach China in an effective way. Okay, so why should you be thinking about China? Why should your company be thinking about China as an export market? Well, I think most of you will be aware of China's rapid growth over the past few decades. And if we take a look at this graph, we can really see the extent of China's expansion over the past 3 decades. Looking back to 1978, which was when China first sort of opened up to the outside world, its economy was roughly the same size as the UK's. There you see the red line is China's GDP, the blue line is the UK's GDP. And the two economies actually were fairly similar in size during the 80s and the 90s. In fact, the UK economy slightly outperformed China. China really was below par in terms of its performance as an economy. Of course, over the past 10 years, that's changed remarkably, and in 2005, China overtook the UK in terms of its total GDP, and it currently stands at around 7.3 trillion US dollars, which is now 3 times larger than the UK economy. It's the second largest economy in the world. It's expected to overtake the US by 2025. And although we're expecting to see that rate of growth to decline slightly over the next couple of years, it's still expected to grow by around about 7 to 8%. And of course, that is creating huge opportunities for foreign exporters looking to sell into the market.
I have a question here from Calvin. He asked very quickly, what particularly changed in 2005 to make the graph change so steeply?
Well, I think if we go back to sort of around 2001, that was when China entered the WTO. So really the early sort of 2000 periods was when a lot of restrictions were removed in China. It became a much easier place in terms of foreign investment. And I think as well, if you sort of look over the past 5 years, there has been a sort of switch away from markets in the US and an attention towards China, just because of the growing wealth there. Of course, a lot of this growth in China has been driven by it's been export-led growth. So I think that growth really has been driven by exports, but increasingly we're seeing a kind of a shift towards the opening up of China's domestic economy. And that sort of leads me neatly onto my next slide. So this graph really shows the UK-China bilateral trading relationship over the past 10 years. And as you can see, that's also increased rapidly. It currently stands at 39 billion pounds in terms of two-way trade between the two countries. interestingly, I think what you'll see from this graph is that if we look back to 2004, exports to China, which is the light blue section of the bar, were actually quite small in proportion in comparison to imports from China. And I think that mirrors the fact that China's growth has been driven primarily by exports. But over the past couple of years, we've really seen a switch in that, and an increasing proportion of that bilateral trade is actually taken up by exports to China. And I think that that's happened due to sort of strengthening of the renminbi, due to increased costs of production in China, making Chinese exports less competitive. And also, as wealth has grown in China, the consumer market has begun to develop. The Chinese government has been very active in trying to open up the domestic market, and of course that is creating opportunities for UK exporters, both in terms of high-value services and products being sold into that consumer market. So that's I think that balance, that structure of trade will continue to shift in the years ahead, driven both by policy and by increasing wealth within China. So why else should UK companies be thinking about China? Well, I think it's important to recognise the sheer size and scale of China as a country. It is quite literally continental in scale. If you were to lay a map of Europe across China, the Chinese territory would stretch from Iceland across to the Urals, and from the Arctic Circle down to North Africa. So it's quite literally a huge country. It's home to 1.3 billion people, a fifth of the world's population, and of course a growing proportion of those people are now moving into the middle class. So there are over 300 million middle class consumers in China, more than the entire population of the US. So there are good reasons for companies to get excited about China and to have it on their radars. Of course, as being such a large country does make the challenge of exporting there more complex. It does need to be seen in continental terms. There are huge regional differences between north, south, east and west, between rural areas and urban areas. There are geographical, cultural, climate differences. The way that business is done between provinces is very different, the infrastructure and so on. So I think that when approaching the Chinese market, it's important to take a regional approach and understand that there is no one-size-fits-all approach for China. The products and services in demand in one particular region may be very different from another part of China. Sorry, just bear with me a second, just some delay on the slides there. So in terms of where foreign exporters should focus their energies, this is a question that we're often asked here at the China-Britain Business Council. And in the past, there has been a tendency for exporters to focus very much on the most developed cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou and Shenzhen, which are circled there. These are the cities that have historically been most open to foreign investment. They're very populous areas, high levels of per capita GDP, very populous areas with huge groups of consumers. And of course, they tended to be the most developed in terms of infrastructure and supply chain, etc. Now, I think it's still the case that companies that are coming to China for the first time tend to focus on these areas because they tend to be the most sophisticated marketplaces. If you're offering something which is sort of high value added product, then they are the logical place to start. They also tend to have business cultures most receptive to bringing products and services in from the outside world. However, it's important to recognize that these markets, I suppose, because there has been so much investment from foreign companies, there is a sense of, in some cases, that the competition is quite fierce. They are becoming slightly saturated within certain markets. And actually, there are opportunities beyond these three cities. Now, CBBC over the past couple of years has carried out research looking beyond the Tier 1 cities at the Tier 2, Tier 3 cities. And we sort of identified 35 key cities around China which are organized into these 12 city clusters. Now, these are areas with high rates of economic growth, very high populations, cities, literally cities with sort of 2-3 million people in them, and a burgeoning middle class. And I think that in the future it's likely that exporters will increasingly find opportunities in these areas, and that's where the real growth is set to come from in the future. Now, apart from the economics of China's growth, there are other reasons why opportunities are emerging for foreign, for British exporters, particularly social reasons. So economic growth has brought about a rapid process of urbanization, people moving away from rural areas into China's cities, and there's been a rapid expansion of those cities. Of course, that process of urbanization, China's cities are expected to have around about 1 billion people will be living in Chinese cities by the year 2025, and that is placing a tremendous strain on the support services such as transportation, such as building and infrastructure, communication networks, and so on, healthcare, etc. So companies that are supplying products and services into these applications certainly are likely to see opportunities in the future. Just briefly then to run through some other areas where we expect to see opportunities for UK exporters, products and services to support environmental change in China. Obviously, environmental problems have been another unwanted consequence of China's rapid economic growth. Rising incomes, as I alluded to, the growth of the middle class, so China's consumer marketplace is also growing very rapidly. Finally, an aging society, a one-child policy, improved healthcare, and so on, has led to the growth of the rapid aging of society, and again that's creating opportunities for companies specializing in products and services to cater to the elderly. Just a few considerations then for exporters who are looking to export to China for the first time, and I'm sure that the other speakers will have some thoughts on this as well. China does have very different regulations than exist in other markets. So working with distributors that have an import license, ensuring that your products are tested. There are CCC standards for testing standards for certain products, and also sort of product-specific standards and approval processes that companies need to go through before they can actually export to China. Also important to take into account are the duties on your products in order for you to calculate your landed cost, and then on top of that any sort of the margins that will be required for the different layers of distributors that you'll be working through in order to reach the market. I mentioned their partners. Obviously, it's almost essential when dealing with a country of China's size to work through local distributors or partners. So ensuring that you have the right type of, that you have the right partner in place to help you to expand your presence in the market is important. Many companies will be approached by Chinese companies that may not be reputable, and it's important to sort of go through the process of checking the credentials of those companies, looking at their business license, carrying out some basic due diligence, and also maybe carrying out some commercial due diligence on whether or not that company really has the network to help you develop the market. Also, it's important to take into account our contract terms and getting paid, which obviously Tony will be talking about briefly. So I will move on to my final point, which is about protecting your IPR. Any companies that have technology, IP that they need to protect. China is less developed in terms of its legal protections for IPR. Now, it's not impossible to go into China and protect your trademarks and patents, but it is important to have a strategy and to work with advisors, legal advisors, to make sure that you develop a strategy that will work in China.
Well, I might just jump in there, Mark. What I would say is if you're even considering going to China quite seriously, even at this early stage, look into registering trademarks and patents. China still works on a first-to-file system. So if somebody in China just goes and registers your patent or your trademark now because they got there first, you may have some issue if you then go and try and trade in that company. We have at CBBC seen some instances of this. So if you are thinking about going to China, this is a really key thing to do quite quickly.
Okay, thanks, David. So obviously, I'm sure that some of you will have questions. Just a very quick, very brief introduction, really, to some of the considerations when looking to export to China. Now, just a few comments about CBBC, really, to wrap up with. We are the leading organisation for helping British companies to do business in China. We help UK companies of all sizes and from across different market sectors with their market entry approach to market entry. We have a membership program which offers business support, practical services, access and networking opportunities. We work very closely with the UKTI and FCO, and we have a strategic partnership with the British Chamber of Commerce in Beijing. We also have a network of contacts, senior contacts within government in China. We have a large team of China business experts both here in the UK and in China, and we currently have a network of 13 offices across China as well as 10 offices here in the UK. So just to give you an overview there of where our offices are in the UK, we'd be more than happy to speak to anyone depending on where you're based in the UK, and this is just an overview of our offices across China. Okay, and so with that I will hand back to David, and I think there will be another poll.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for putting everything in context there. I think particularly that slide that says considerations to exporters. Look, every market you go to has all of those considerations. I think the takeaway here is that China has its own set of circumstances and situations that you needed to address pretty seriously. Okay, I think we've got another poll coming. Perhaps we could launch our next poll, please. So, what do you think is the biggest barrier to UK businesses when exporting to China? Lack of knowledge, lack of confidence in foreign buyers, lack of confidence in being paid, and unsure how to find trading partners. Right. So just take a few seconds to click on that, please. Again, it will give the speakers a little bit of perspective. While we're waiting for that, I will introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is from HSBC. Obviously, HSBC is a powerhouse of a bank and service provider in that area and has a huge presence there. So our speaker today is Tony Shek. Tony works in the Global Trade and Receivable Finance area. Tony has been working for HSBC Group since 1989 and has worked in a wide range of customer-facing roles from corporate banking, commercial banking, trade to retail banking segments. He has also worked in the group's learning development function, specializing in the delivery of trade finance courses. Geographically, Tony has worked for the group in Hong Kong, Canada, and the UK. His current role is to help provide solutions to the trade requirements of the bank's UK corporate customers in the Thames Valley region. So that's Tony. So while we're waiting for that, let's have a look at what people think about the biggest barrier to UK businesses when exporting to China. Well, that's pretty clear. Lack of knowledge is right up there, and unsure how to find trading partners. I think they're the two things that we would have, we would hear very regularly in our organization. I think there's no lack of confidence. I think people want to go and people want to try, and I do think that the system of being paid, I think that's improving. I certainly think the regulatory framework in China is becoming much more dependable than the reputation and the myth shows in a lot of media and throughout the world. Okay, maybe we can close that, please. All right, I think we move forward. We hand over to Tony. Tony, are you there, please?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, David, and thank you for the invitation by UKTI and HIPU for to participate in this presentation. Hello, everybody. I'm Tony, and I work for the bank in China as well for a little bit of time. The China desk of our bank for a while as well. So today. Talking about getting paid from China, I think speaking from an exporter's perspective, this is one of the key factors, right? Getting paid for the goods or services that you provide to your counterpart or in China. But before we talk about how to get paid, I think it's important to identify the risks actually that you may be faced when you decide I'll go and trade with a buyer in China, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, bear with me for. Okay. Oh, sorry, too fast. Yeah, there are a couple of risks involved in doing trade with China, and in international trade generally, because it's not like selling your goods to a domestic company down the road in the same town as you are located. For selling into China, the key risk is the country risk. Maybe a lot of people don't really know China because it's halfway around the world, although the opening up politically is more stable nowadays, but still. Like Mark mentioned earlier, there are a lot of import regulations governing, so there is a certain risk for selling into China. The next risk is commercial risk. In selling to China, you don't know. I noticed the poll earlier. A lot of you may know who am I going to find my partners, right? Normally, what you do is through a lot of agents or whatever, and also nowadays the Chinese government organization have published kind of like what they call the blacklist of countries that are not performing so good in the past. So for you can have certain reference material for track records of certain customers locally. And for industry risk, China is a huge country, and demand for different products are very significantly. And also there is also the macro environment, a macroeconomic environment affecting the demand for certain goods in China. So you need to understand the market perfectly before you decide what is the best product that or where is exactly the best location for you to sell. Foreign exchange. Another key issue, because you're selling internationally, if you're selling into China, basically the best thing, obviously, if you can convince your Chinese buyer to pay you sterling, right, that mitigate your foreign exchange risk. But unfortunately, the world doesn't act like that, just like that. Sometimes you need to face with the prospect of receiving maybe US dollar, euro, or even nowadays the Chinese currency, renminbi, which has been gradually been opened up by the Chinese government, is becoming more and more much easier and more flexible in terms of dealing with that. But having said that, there are still certain risks involved in the fluctuation of the exchange rate and things like that. Another key risk in selling in China is the performance risk. Not only your Chinese buyer, but yourself. In accordance with the sales contract, are you able to perform as per the sales contract, or any failure to do so will probably end up in failure to get your payment. And obviously, the transportation is a key risk as well, because you're talking about transporting goods from, let's say, from the UK halfway around the world to China. You'll probably be utilizing maybe air, maybe sea, right? The goods will be on the road for quite a prolonged period of time, and you need to consider how you mitigate or reduce the risk involved during that transit period. Many of these risks that I've just mentioned can actually be insured against or mitigated actually through the payment mechanism that you use when you deal with your Chinese buyer. My next slide, probably you have a glimpse of it earlier, is more like compare the different payment methods available in selling into China. From this trade risk ladder, I kind of love it actually, because It gives you a good insight in the comparison of the different payment methods available to, especially to the exporter in terms of dealing internationally. From the perspective of an exporter, as you can see from on the left-hand side of the risk ladder, you can see that we are comparing the different payment mechanisms. To categorize, there are 4 key payment mechanisms: open account, documents against documentary collection, documentary credit, or advance payments. From an exporter's perspective, obviously, if you are selling goods into China and you're selling it for the first time, the most preferred method will be advance payment. But having said that, if this is the first time that you deal with your Chinese buyer, they will probably think likewise. How am I going to ensure that if I give you the money first, and then I'll get the right goods and the correct goods? So from the importer, the buyer's perspective in China, their preferred payment method will be open accounts. So there is a conflict of preference for the payment mechanism, and through these kind of like mediation, may I use the word, by banks, by providing alternative solution. This will hopefully bring the buyer and the seller closer together with the hope of achieving a transaction. Documentary collection, as I said, complies 2 key methods: documents against acceptance and documents against payment. Basically, these 2 methods just similar to open account, but the exception is, like documents against acceptance, is utilizing the bank to collect the money on your behalf as an exporter in the UK. Like when you ship the goods to the Chinese buyer, you then send all the necessary documents. Unlike open account, you send it directly to the buyer. But here, under documents against acceptance, you send it through the banking mechanism. So you're trusting that the banks involved in between will help you to collect the money on your behalf. And documents against payment is kind of like asking your bank to contact the buyer's bank in China to collect the money against. Once the buyer gives the money, then the bank will release the documents that you've sent over. So in a
Tony,
way,
I have a quick question here.
Yes,
Tony, I have a quick question from Susan, and she asks, should UK businesses consider trading in renminbi? Or I guess there's a whole background to that, but how open is the currency, I guess, and which is the best currency to trade in?
It's a good question. Basically, the opening up of renminbi is a gradual process, and since 2009, the Chinese government has allowed more flexibility in overseas buyers and sellers dealing in renminbi. Our experience is that the offering of this additional, because historically trade with China has been basically denominated in US dollar. The opening up of renminbi, meaning let's say from the exporter's perspective, you can actually offer additional option, alternative to the buyers in China, because effectively you are taking away, it may be some kind of bargaining chip for you, because you're offering them additional option. You're effectively taking away the foreign exchange risk for the Chinese buyer, because it may be that they will resell your goods locally, and their income will be renminbi denominated. And for that, if you are willing to accept renminbi, that means you take away their foreign exchange risk, and it may be something for you to negotiate in terms of a cheaper pricing.
Thanks for that, Tony. Just keep moving now.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope that addressed your question. And the other, apart from documentary collection, the other option is what we call document credit or letters of credit. And a lot of people also refer to it as letter of credit. Basically, it's a more popular instrument. Let me put it, a payment mechanism to be used in China. It's quite because it's kind of like one of the alternatives for a lot of Chinese companies to obtain financing from their banks locally. Documentary credit, basically, from an exporter's perspective, you are asking the buyer's bank to give you a letter of credit, meaning your risk is changed from the buyer's risk to the bank risk. And one more additional, let's say if you're first time selling into China and you don't know the issuing bank in China, even better way of mitigating that bank risk and country risk is what we call confirmed documentary credit, meaning you are asking your local bank, maybe your banker in the UK, if they are happy with the risk of the issuing bank in China, they stand in their place instead. That means once you send the documents called for under the documentary credit called in the issued by the Chinese bank, and if your local bank in UK are happy to confirm it, they will pay you upfront. That means you get your money faster. So kind of like these kinds of payment alternatives offer you the option, different levels of security to you as the exporter in the UK in order to ring-fence your position. My next slide will probably cover, you say that I'm an exporter. Okay, I've talked with my Chinese buyer. We've decided on a certain payment mechanism. But how about funding-wise? Funding-wise, it depends on what we call the trade cycle. In this example I have in my slide, basically this trade cycle outlines the whole duration of a trade transaction from the time that an order is has been placed by the Chinese buyer, like on day 0, until the time you actually receive the money from the Chinese buyer. Here, my example is based upon a 90 days credit open account credit terms. So effectively, you can see that different stage this trade cycle will represent different stages where you, as the exporter, require financial assistance. And to be honest, every trade cycle of every single company is unique. Although the elements are more or less the same, like the manufacturing, the stocking, the stock holding, the shipping, and the credit sales. But each stage will place different demands on the company's finances, and the key component in determining the overall level of working capital required is actually determined by the time taken between different stages. And banks normally will be able to provide the appropriate funding product, whatever form it may be, to help you in completing that transaction. I hope this very quick run-through can give you at least a good idea of how dealings, especially selling into China, getting money paid through different payment mechanisms will give you some insights.
Thanks, Tony. I have a question.
I'm happy to answer questions later. Yes, David?
Yeah, I have a quick question, which I suppose to go some degree to what you're talking about. It's a question here from John, and he says, I hear personal relationships are more important than contracts and documents in China. Is this true?
Yeah. In China, as maybe Mark knows Mandarin, he can testify as a guanxi, or what we call relationship, is one of the utmost important factors in doing business. But having said that, as China begins to open up, let me put it this way: the rule of the contract is playing a more and more significant role. At the end of the day, if you are talking about international trade, if it is, let's say, using documentary credit as a payment mechanism, is subject to an internationally accepted, like the UCP 600 rules to govern that whole transaction so effectively that give additional comfort to the overseas sellers who wants to go into the Chinese market.
All right, thanks for that, Tony. Okay, let's move along then, if we can. I think we have another poll coming up. So who do you normally direct your export inquiries to? So this is a poll actually that you can click more than one answer. So if you could click on whichever options are relevant to you, more than one answer. We could launch that now. So is it professional services, e.g. Tony and his friends at the bank? Is it UKTI? A Chamber of Commerce, somebody like ourselves here at CBBC, an internet search, or peers. Again, you can choose more than one option for that. We'll just give it another couple of seconds. If you could just click, and don't forget to click on the submit button at the bottom. So While we're doing that, I'd like to introduce our final speaker. So we've looked at it a little bit from the Trade Relations Organization. We've also looked at it from the finance and document perspective. Now we're going to look at a company who has gone to a very successful company here in the UK and in other parts of the world that has gone to China with its product and also done extremely well there. So I'd like to introduce Gemma Clarke from Tangle Teezer. I don't know what Tangle Teezer is because apparently I don't need the product. My hair isn't quite long enough. But I have promised my colleagues that I will let it grow, especially so I can use it.
Very good.
So Gemma is the MD of Global Markets at Tangle Teezer, managing growth into over 60 countries at the last count. After senior roles at global beauty companies, followed by launching her own personal care brands, she met Sean Poultry, who invented Tangle Teezer, in late 2007, and since then, Tangle Teezer has become a phenomenon. Winner of over 20 professional and consumer awards, winner of the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation in 2012, loved by royalty, celebrities, models, hairdressers, women, men, children, and even pets, and me soon when I grow my hair long enough. In 2005 and 6, Gemma studied at China's prestigious Tsinghua University in Beijing as part of an international MBA. While studying alongside some of China's future political leaders, business leaders and entrepreneurs, she developed a great warmth for the Chinese people and a better understanding of building relationships with Chinese businesses. She also saw the vast potential for those UK companies who were prepared to listen and learn from their Chinese partners rather than trying to impose a prescribed strategy for market entry. And I think that last message is an extremely pertinent and important one. Okay, before I hand over to you, Gemma, let's just look at our quick poll results. Who do you normally ask your exporting questions? So a bit of a mix there. UKTI get quite a nod and a lot of internet search. I think, well, my personal thing would be to balance all of those things and make sure that you get out there and get as many opinions as you possibly can, particularly for a great market like China. Everyone has an opinion on it and everyone has a perspective on it. All right, let's hand over to Gemma.
Thank you, David. How do I follow that introduction? I'm not quite sure. I'll just wait for the slides to come up. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background, we just thought it may be interesting to give you a feel for a British company that's been selling into the China market for the last 2.5 years. And I think in 2008, 2009, our assumption was, well, there's no way we could sell a plastic hairbrush into the China market. We had a number of assumptions. The first one being that, well, wages must be really low in China and they're not going to buy a hairbrush which is 10 times the cost of a normal Chinese hairbrush. The assumption was also that you had to build up relationships over a period of years and go to frequent banquets and get drunk, and unfortunately we found that wasn't true in our case. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about Tangle Teezer. Some of you may recognize the name. Sean actually launched it on the Dragon's Den in November 2007. And it's fair to say it probably wasn't his best pitch ever, and he didn't secure investment. So it's probably quite a good thing, because 5 years later we were actually in 60 countries worldwide, and China has become our second biggest global market after Germany, and we'll sell over 200,000 Tangle Teezers in China in 2013. So I just want to debunk some of the myths. We've already heard about from David, from Tony, about price, and our assumption was that we need to offer a very low price in China. Absolutely, that was not the case. I think in 2.5 years we've only had one discussion about price with our Chinese distributors, which may be a good thing or maybe it's a bad thing. Maybe I offered too low a price in the first case. But what is absolutely fundamental to our Chinese distributors is the fact that our product is made in the UK. We actually even offered to make it in China to strip out the shipping costs, but they were insistent it had to be made in the UK, because made in the UK carries a lot of weight. It suggests innovation, design, quality in manufacture, but above all, branding. Branding is really, really important to our target market, which is affluent, middle class, and young, aspirational Chinese. And they love to carry their Western brands. I mean, the best example I have, I often, when you're wandering through the duty-free shops in the airport, whenever I seem to go into one of these luxury shops, they look at me as a potential shoplifter, I think. Whereas when the Chinese walk into the shops, they're almost genuflecting and salivating at the potential sale. There is a huge drive for consumption and particularly consumer goods within China. And just one top tip that we'd like to suggest is that maybe you offer an exclusive product for the China market. It really does pay dividends. We are aware that a lot of the Chinese shopping tourists that come to London love to buy their designer handbags in London to take them back to China because their friends won't have the same bag. The other assumption we made back in 2007, 2008 was, well, we better not launch into China because inevitably our product will be copied. And I'll be honest with you, it would be naive to say that will definitely not happen. We almost have a game of Frogger, I think that's the game was called, that we have got fake Tangle Teezers being manufactured in China, and they're being marketed on Alibaba. So every time we knock one off, another one emerges. But that's just a fact of life, and I think
Gemma, just to reach across you there, Alibaba, for those who don't know, is one of these enormous trade portals. So there's Taobao, Tmall, Alibaba for those, and these are trade platforms not too far away from Amazon and eBay, but they're genuinely gigantic in China and extremely important. Sorry, Gemma, keep going.
No, thank you, thank you. So, but we have noticed that things are changing. What was absolutely bizarre to us was that before our Chinese distributors would agree to become our distributors, we had to jump through hoops to prove that we own the intellectual property to Tangle Teezer. And I had 2 weeks of frequent phone calls, almost with our Chinese partners, shouting at me that they needed our documents to be chopped. Well, we didn't have a company stamp. But it was absolutely fundamental to them that they proved we had the genuine product. So I think things are changing in China. And again, I think that's what one of the speakers has mentioned earlier. And the other assumption is that I noticed a lot of our attendees are new to exporting and also new to the China market. And again, there is this assumption, well, it requires huge investment. It takes too long to earn a return. You need to build up a relationship. In actual fact, it took us 3 months from initiating discussions to launching within the China market. And actually, one of the real opportunities for us was new market entry methods and social media. I'll tell you the truth, what actually happened was in, I think it was early 2010, that we suddenly getting floods of orders on our website from with Chinese surnames. So Miss Li, Miss Wang, Miss Zhou, Miss Zhang were all ordering Tangle Teezers. We had absolutely no idea what was happening. And so we did a little bit of digging. And actually what had happened was there was a very famous Chinese model whose name I've never known, who was shopping in Oxford Street and bought a Tangle Teezer in Boots in London, blogged about it in China, and suddenly, bang, we had this awareness in China. And out of that social media blogging within China, and the Chinese are very keen on internet shopping, we were...
Gemma, I have a quick question here to reach across you again from Pardeep. He said, what research did you carry out in China to ensure that your product would be accepted with the Chinese market?
Okay, that's a very good question. Actually, what we did do with our Chinese distributors, we had a sense of the demand from our Chinese model. So we actually launched on Taobao through our distributors without shouting about it, just to get some feel for, are our prices appropriate for the Chinese market? And Tangle Teezer in China sells at the equivalent retail price as it does in the UK. We launched on Taobao, and we also got our Chinese distributors send out samples to bloggers within China. And the feedback that started to come back was overwhelmingly positive, and it proved to us, yes, there is a market. 2, if actually we use new market entry methods, so online shopping portals, we can actually cut down the supply chain, make very, very good margins, and also we have this huge reach across China through the internet. The other thing we did do, we were approached again in the middle of 2010 by a Chinese home shopping channel, similar to QVC in the UK, if you're aware of that. And we nearly fell on the floor when they said, actually, they have 400 million viewers. Well, if 400 million viewers suddenly clicked and decided they'd like to buy a Tangle Teezer, it would have been an absolute disaster. So we actually used Taiwan as a test market for the China market with home shopping. Taiwan has a population, I think, of about 25 million, so it was relatively safe. It didn't put pressure on our production capacity. And so we've grown steadily within China, and it's been very, very exciting. And probably the last thing I wanted to touch on is for those exporters who are, or those companies who are new to exporting. The perceived wisdom is that really you should focus upon your near markets first, so France or Germany or Scandinavia, Ireland particularly. But actually we found it much more difficult to build a relationship within France and Germany. And we think part of that is that because within China there's this real dynamism and energy and this entrepreneurial spirit that perhaps we've lost a little in the West. Our distributors are young, entrepreneurial Chinese who've studied abroad, and I think they're called returning turtles. They've returned to China. They're fluent in English. We've never had a problem with language. They actually studied in Manchester, so that gave us some feel for a relationship. And without question, China is now our most exciting, stimulating, and fastest growing market. And honestly, if we can sell plastic hairbrushes there, we hope anything is possible. So thank you for your time this morning, and I hope that's given you some insights.
Thanks very much. Gemma, I've got a question from Frank here, and he asks, how did you go about finding good distributors?
Okay, that's again a very good question. We're in a relatively fortunate position in that we're always approached by, I probably get 2 or 3 inquiries a week from potential distributors all around the world, and really it's just us assessing their knowledge and contacts within the local market. And so we had all these inquiries from distributors within China. What made us warm to the ones we chose were their knowledge and contacts, and also the fact that we learned from them. We didn't have a prescription that said, well, if you launch Tangle Teezer in a country, what you must do is you need to launch through hair salons, and then you need to launch into retail. We didn't go to teach, we went to learn. And what we learned from our potential distributors was how to access this young and growing market profitably.
Okay, and there's a question that Frankie asked, and it links a little bit to what we're just talking about. He says, how important is it for a trading agent to actually meet the buyers and suppliers? Did you feel that was necessary?
Actually, we're very bad. We only met our distributors 2 years after we started supplying them. That's awful, isn't it? We only met them for the first time this year. So we must have a lot of trust, I guess. I think it is important because you get you can look them in the eyes and you get a feel for the trust. One of the biggest concerns is that you might launch with a particular distributor, and I've heard horror stories about this. So you'll launch your product in China through a distributor, and actually orders are very strong for the first 6 months, and then they start to tail off, and all they've done is replace the genuine product with the fake product. And one thing we do to combat that is just continually innovate and offer new products for the China market.
Richard asks, how large were your distributors? Are they regional, national, or I suppose how local did you go in your distribution channels?
Because we were launching through online shopping, through home shopping, our distributors were based in Hong Kong. They're now based in Shanghai, and pretty much from day one we were national because it was all online.
Yeah, wow! It seems it's a fascinating story. I'd like to bring the other 2 speakers in. Something that we heard a little bit about was social media, and I think it's pretty much impossible to talk about products in China without talking about social media and its traction and how valuable it is and the differences that it is to this part of the world. Mark, perhaps you could give a little bit of perspective on what social media means in China compared to here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really grown very, very quickly over the past decade, the importance of the internet and social media. Obviously, there's over 500 million internet users in China now, and I believe around about 300 million people using social media. And you think about, I mean, the numbers are insane, really, when you think, there's more people using social media in China than the entire population of the US. So it's a very powerful tool, particularly for consumer products and markets. I think the thing that companies need to be aware of is that it's not just a case of using Twitter and Facebook and those platforms that we may be familiar with using here in the West. In China, it does have its own its own ecosystem in terms of social media, so the Weibo and other similar social media sites. So I suppose it's important to understand that and have, I suppose, partners on the ground, or at least a presence in China that can help you with that, and also to localize your messages as much as possible for the local China market. So yes, it's an opportunity, but it's maybe not as straightforward as it could be in terms of just rolling out the same strategy that you have here in the UK.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, last week the CBBC, we held a large conference, and one of the keynote speakers was the president of Jaguar Land Rover. His name is Bob Grace, and to see a company like that that's been so successful in China with what is perceived as a very luxury product, still, you know, using Weibo and Kaixinwang, which are the Chinese versions of Twitter and Facebook and these sorts of things, using those platforms was an absolutely integral part of their marketing strategy throughout China. So I would certainly say that social media is an extremely important thing. Even if you think your company is small and you don't need that, that is how to get the word out there. Gemma, have you been able to use social media to your benefit in China?
Our distributors use Weibo a lot. It's a great way of testing the market and getting a reaction to your product, to the pricing. It does the job for us. There's nothing as powerful as word of mouth.
Yeah, and it is just how people communicate in China via those networks. It's a much more online kind of place. Okay. If you have any questions, please drop them in. You can see the platform there in front of you. I have a question here from, and this is quite a general question, and maybe I'll give each speaker their perspective on this. It's a question here from Stan. How much is language and cultural differences likely to be a barrier to getting started and marketing my products and services in China? Tony, we haven't heard from you in a little while. Language and cultural differences. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, speaking Korean from a Chinese myself, sometimes it matters because the way we live, especially the Chinese is a big market, and it's a little bit different. It's quite different from what we used to. Like you guys mentioned about the social media thing, the way we behave. So it's always nice, I think, if you can have a trustworthy local agent to help you, especially when you start up. That will be a great help.
Okay. Mark, how would you feel about the cultural and language barriers?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're not in... Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think that the sort of cultural and language differences are there. They need to be recognized, but they're not insurmountable. I think that when you go to China to meet with partners and customers, it's important, for example, to have a translator with you to ensure that nothing gets lost in translation. The level of English in China's more developed cities is actually quite high, so you'll typically find that there are English speakers that you can deal with within most organizations, but as you get out to the more remote regions, then you may begin to struggle. I think language is probably less important. I mean, you can work around language with translators and so on as the culture. Important to recognize that Chinese culture is quite different from Western culture in terms of the values there. There's a strong emphasis placed on those personal networks and relationships, and it is important to take the time, I think, to sort of understand that and to nurture those relationships. Chinese organizations tend to be more hierarchical than Western organizations, which are flatter. We're more focused on transactional business, whereas in China it tends to be more relationship-based business deals and so on. But I think that with a little learning can go a long way, and just learning a few sort of tips in terms of how to approach people when you go to China, using business gifts, using the various different courtesies within meetings and so on, can help to almost smooth that process. And even learning a few words of Chinese when you go out there can very much help to cement those relationships.
All right, thanks for that. Gemma, over to yourself. Any cultural linguistic issues? I know you touched on a few, but maybe just put it in a kind of a kernel that people can take away.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that if you'd ever heard my Mandarin, speaking Mandarin in China, it is good to know a few words, but certainly most organizations we've come across in China do have very strong, fluent English speakers who often have studied abroad. And as far as the culture, that's quite difficult to measure. You know, I do wonder, because I have this warmth for China and I've studied at university there, whether or not that played a part in building the relationship in the early days. But maybe that's changing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, certainly from my perspective, and I spent a decade living there, it's a very changing, massively changing culture and society. And I think if you just go about your business positively and with a smile on your face, you'll do okay. Again, one of the things I would say from my personal perspective, and I don't speak for the others, is that there are a lot of myths about China, and it's either China bashing or it's China fawning. The reality is somewhere in the middle, like every other market. Okay, I think we're going to not go too much over time. We've done our hour for this morning. There's a couple of questions that are still that we haven't got to. From Alan and Michael and a couple from Kelvin. We will get to your comments. As I say, we don't want to go on too long this morning. So what I would like to say is I'd like to thank very much Haibu and UKTI and this Open to Export webinar for getting started in China. I'd like to thank our three speakers, Mark, Gemma, and Tony. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your perspectives. We hope that this is really valuable to you. Please use the Open to Export platform. It's designed as a forum for you to get information about how to improve your exporting. So really, that's it for today. What I would like to say is thank you very much for your time, and have a great day and have great exporting. Bye-bye now.